Welcome back. We're talking about the US and Iran. What's the threat perceived by George Bush, if any? And who, if anyone, should be frightened? The US president's in the Gulf and letting it be known that he blames Tehran for many of the ills in the world.
Iran is today the world's leading state sponsor of terror. It sends hundreds of millions of dollars to extremists around the world, while its own people face repression and economic hardship at home. It undermines Lebanese hopes for peace by arming and aiding the terrorist group Hezbollah. It subverts the hope for peace in other parts of the region by funding terrorist groups like Hamas, the Palestine Islamic Jihad. It sends arms to the Taliban in Afghanistan and Shia militants in Iraq. It seeks to intimidate its neighbors with ballistic missiles and bellicose rhetoric.
Well, a very long list of complaints there from the US president. Let's go straight back to Tehran, talk to Sadegh Zibak-Alam, professor at Tehran University. It's a very complicated relationship, is it not? The one between the GCC countries like Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates and Tehran. And it's one that we saw at the end of last year, President Ahmadinejad trying to bolster when he came to a meeting of theirs. So what is the state of play at the moment?
Well, I mean, you seek and you look at any part of the world, obviously there are border differences, there are all kinds of differences between any neighbors in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, everywhere. And I'm not saying that there aren't any differences over oil, over the right of shipment, etc., between Iran and the Gulf state, in much the same way that there are differences and quarrel over various issues between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. But what the United States is trying to do, and I'm afraid some Arab leaders are colluding with United States, is that United States and George Bush is trying to create fear of Iran in the heart of the Arab people, and it breaks my heart to see that some of our Arab colleagues, some of our Arab leaders are actually colluding with George Bush. What threat during the past 3 decades has come from the Islamic Republic of Iran to any of the Gulf states, given the fact that all of them were colluding with Saddam, all of them are now colluding with the United States? In spite of that, there hasn't been any threat coming from Iran towards any of the Gulf states.
Is that the way you see it, Sami Al-Faraj, in Kuwait?
Well, George Bush was not there when Iran occupied 3 islands of the United Arab Emirates. George Bush was not there when Iran was interfering in domestic affairs. Today, Iran interferes in the affairs of Iraq, which is really the cornerstone of any would-be security arrangement in the Gulf. It interferes as far as, the Palestinian lands, the Lebanese issue, the Syrian issue, all other issues. Yesterday in Kuwait City, there were attacks on bookstores, Muslim bookstores, in anticipation with the start of, the Ashura rituals. I would expect some strife here happening next week, people doing the same to the Shiite bookstores. So we are anticipating a lot of things. These things are not really planned by George Bush or by by the Israelis. These are part of the things happening here in the Gulf, and this is like the trademark of the Iranian Secret Service, which we really experienced during the Iran-Iraq war, we experienced in Lebanon, we experienced in Saudi Arabia, in many aspects, in many parts of the Gulf before the arrival of George Bush.
Yeah, come back in if you would, Professor Zibak-Alam.
Well, first of all, I don't think that Iran's involvement with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, I can't understand why Iran's involvement with Hezbollah in Lebanon, why Iran's support for Palestinian people, when all the Arabs, including the Gulf state, have turned a blind eyes over the calamity and the horrible situation of the Palestinian people. Kuwaitis are not thinking about them. Saudis are not thinking about them. The rich Gulf states are not thinking about them. I think that the Kuwaitis must be proud of what the Iranians are supporting Palestinian and Hezbollah. As for the as for the accusation that Iran is meddling with the domestic affair of Kuwait and other Arab states, I am sorry, sir. What you should do, you should democratize your country so that you should not be afraid of your own people and blame Iran for political unrest and for political dissension.
OK, let's go to Washington. Patrick Clausen. The Gulf states would surely not be preparing their defences as assiduously as they are at the moment, with the help of the United States, if they didn't believe there was a serious threat. And yet, they're also rather worried about trusting the United States implicitly. How do those two things marry up?
Well, you've put your finger on the big problem facing Gulf leaders. They depend upon the United States, but they don't have a great deal of respect for the judgment and skill of the Bush administration in particular for dealing with these issues. And that's one reason I think that they are quite delighted to see that the Bush administration is emphasizing the importance of international diplomacy, and in particular of the European role for resolving the nuclear issue. Because the Bush administration's record in Iraq has been so checkered, there's a lot of worries about what might happen if the United States took principal responsibility for the Iran nuclear portfolio. But fortunately, it's been the Europeans, and that's why the United States has agreed to allow Javier Solano to speak for it, as well as for the European Union in his discussions with the Iranians about the nuclear file.
Sami Al-Faraj, is it the United States per se that perhaps the GCC countries don't trust, or is it this current administration? Can things change?
Oh, there are confusing, signals coming from the Bush administration, and the United States in general has done this before. Today, I guess President Bush spent most of his time trying to explain what is national intelligence estimate of Iran means to the United States policy and decision-making with regard to Iran, whether they can really depend on the United States to really come for not only for the defense, but also for the maintaining the balance of power in the Gulf area. Can the United States be dependent on producing a just and a valid agreement between the Palestinians and Israelis? There are many issues in which in which the Gulf Arabs really receive conflicting signs, and they needed to be assured. It is very significant for us, basically, that President Bush visited Kuwait and then visited Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates before going to Saudi Arabia, which is really against the custom. The other thing is that his visit for the United States forces in Kuwait and for his first visit to the United Arab Emirates, all these we take as signals of more assurances of the United States. But again, and other times we will.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say.
Other times we receive conflicting signs, the opposite signs we receive from the United States also.
Let's go back to Tehran for a word with Professor Zibak Alam. I'd like to ask you about one particular section of George Bush's speech in which he said to the Iranian people, you deserve to live under a government that listens to your wishes. One or two questions about that. The first one is, will the people of Iran have been able to see Mr. Bush's speech in the first place?
No, I personally have lots of criticism of Iranian government, of our president, Ahmadinejad. But if George Bush attacks our president, attacks our leader, I am the first one who will defend with the last drop of my blood to defend Ahmadinejad, to defend the supreme leader, to defend my country against the remark by George Bush.
So you'll know at the very beginning. I'm sorry, Professor, I must get this one clear. You'll know at the very beginning. Does that mean the people of Tehran, of Iran, will not have been allowed to see what Mr. Bush had to say, or will they?
No, I think that George Bush's speech would be televised in Iran. Everyone would hear that, because what is in the George Bush that the Islamic regime is frightened of? I mean, in fact, they would be too happy to broadcast all the George Bush's speech, because that simply provides ammunition and fuel for hardliners in Iran.
And what about the much vaunted person in the street, not just the hardliners? What do you think they'd have made of it?
Well, again, but I don't think the intellectual, the intelligentsia, the educated Iranian, I don't think they would be too persuaded by George Bush to come out and to criticize the Islamic regime, because George Bush and the United States policy towards Iran is so discredited in Iran that no one would take George Bush's remark very seriously, I'm afraid.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Patrick Clausen, Sami Al-Faraj and Sadegh Zibak-Alam, thanks for talking to us on Inside Story. Mr. Bush, of course, has said that he believes in 2008 there can be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. When it comes to Iran, which many believe was the real reason for his visit to this area, it could be a very different story. This is Inside Story. Thanks for watching.